For review in Likkutei Sichos in Chelek Chov Daled, volume 24. This is the first Sicha in the Parshas Shoftim. The Rebbe is going to discuss. It seems to be a contradiction. In the Torah, we learn in this week's Parsha that it is a very positive. It's a mitzvah to place a king. It's one of the mitzvahs that the Jewish people were commanded when they come into Eretz Yisrael. One of them is limnos lehem melech, to appoint a king. Why is it when Shmuel wanted to appoint a king, the Eibishter was kind of upset and he said, "Oisima asu," they refused me, they want a king. So is it positive or it's not positive? The Rebbe explains a king has two aspects. One is a very literal aspect, which provides for the life to go on under law and order. Ilmole Moiro, as the Mishnah says, if not for the fear of the king, they would swallow one another alive. So, of course, if Yidden are in a situation that they need that, so otherwise we need a king to just make sure that there is law and order. But that's not the ultimate, that's not what the real purpose of a king. There's a higher level. A king, to bring about his higher level of bittul to Hashem, to bring that down to the people so that they too should be infused by his knowledge. That's the higher level. That's really what Hashem wants us to have, the king, to bring the higher level. But of course, the Eibishter agrees to Shmuel Hanavi over there when they ask for the king, because if they need it, because they're still at the level that otherwise there would be no orderly conduct of the people, so the Eibishter grants them the request because that is necessary. Let's look inside. Aleph, Shoftim. Aleph, number one. Benegeya to their mitzvah from Mindui Melech, as it relates to the mitzvah of appointing a king, which the Pasuk says in our parsha, Soim Tosim Alecha Melech, place you shall place upon you a king. Is Yadua the Shaila, it's known the question. B'shas idnum gebeten by Shmuel Hanavi, when the Yidden asked by the prophet Shmuel, Shno lo melech, give us a king. Is der fun given zeir zufrieden. He was very unhappy of that, of their request. Der Eibishter had gesagt, also Hashem said, Ki oisimo asu goiner. For me, they refused, etc. So it's seemingly, this is very difficult. Das ist doch a mitzvah, was der Eibishter hat angesagt Yidden. This is a mitzvah which Hashem instructed the Yidden. Ubefrat leut meimer Chazal, especially according to the statement, the saying of our sages of blessed memory, it says Gimel mitzvahs nitztavu Yisrael b'knisosam la'aretz, that the Yidden were instructed 3 mitzvahs as they entered to the land, and one of them is lahamid lahem melech, to place for themselves, stand up for themselves a king. Was their funis move on from that's understood. This is the mitzvahs in Eretz Yisrael, and as soon as they enter Eretz Yisrael, ados is a mitzvah nailis b'yaser, that this is a very special mitzvah. It's an elevated, a great mitzvah. It's even those mitzvahs that you need to be in Eretz Yisrael. So, how come the Navi and the Eibishter are not happy with that? And on the other hand, and on the other hand, if we should say that their demand for a king at that time was something not proper, was not wanted, they should not have asked for a king at that time. So how come Hashem then instructed the prophet Shmuel as that he should give in to the Yidden, to give them a king? If this is wrong, so why did the Eibishter consent eventually? Base. Number 2. Ois base. In Chassidus is in them avoid. In Chassidus it explains as their makuban for minu melech. What is the purpose, the intent of appointing a king? Is if tzveyefan. There's 2 ways. Zel mailam is one higher than the other. There's one level and then there's another way, another level. Aleph, a top pashut, a very simple level. While Bilshoin HaMishnah, using the language of the Mishnah. Had it not been the fear of the government, one person would swallow the other person. Ish would swallow him alive. So that reason means, as the melech that the melech, the king, should lead, and he should accomplish as the anhoga for the anshe medina, that the conduct from the people of the country, so zayin kiroi should be fitting, proper. Why do we need a king for that? Rabbi explains that even logically, when you know, you need somebody to sort of help you and enforce it. Even when one's intellect understands, we can understand logically. As that one needs to conduct themselves properly as need to be. He says, but that's not sufficient. Since the eye sees, the heart lusts, etc. That's why we need to come on to the fear of the king. Was spoiled that impacts as menzol zich firen b'derech hayosher, that one should lead, conduct himself in the proper way. So that's the step number one on a very literal level, just to make sure that people are doing the right things. The people of the country, the king enforces the rule of law. Number two, base. When the situation is that the person's mind dominates the heart all the time, which means it's fully in control. We don't need a king to enforce the rules, and you know what's right and you're doing what's right. Isn't it? So then it's not necessary to appoint a king for the above matter. So that's at that point. However, however, there are such matters was that which the people does not have the knowledge to understand how one should conduct in those cases, in those situations. But it's only the king because of his advantage, of his greatness. From his shoulder and up, he's above all the people, using the phrase of Shmuel Aleph with regards to the king. So, because of his level, he understands them, these ways. He gives instructions and commands how one should conduct himself. When the people of the country do so because they themselves can't reach that, they don't understand it. It's the king that knows. The people do so because that's what the king instructed. When those is that inyan for minu melech, this is the idea of appointing a king in the inner and the root by the Jewish people, the inner reason for appointing a king. Is that Eberstein. Who is their master? Who is the king? Is Hashem, the one above. The Melech Vosor Madam was and the king of flesh and blood, the human being, king that we appoint, is their Mamutza was his Megala Malchusis, but is their intermediary who reveals his blessed kingdom to the which means like this: the Jews on their own, they believe, verstehen und fühlen, they understand and they feel that their vitality comes from the kingdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that needs to call out from within them, the subjugation to Hashem. On their own, knowing the fact that the Eibishter is their energy and he's the life force, so they should be subjugated. But when they are in a situation, and they're lacking this subjugation, that they need to come out to a king of flesh and blood. Through the fear of his government, of his kingdom, Vert, etc. Vert by the Oivgiton, that accomplishes by them Adir Ayiro Bittel Tmelech Malcham Loch Baruch, a fear and a subjugation to the king, that king's kings HaKadosh Baruch. That is when they're lacking and they don't have that bittel on their own. Aber, that's at the lower level. Aber b'shas Eden Zayin and Vias Darf zu sein, but when the Jews are as they should be, and by them exists that subjugation to godliness on their own. They don't need a king to impact them with that fear. They have it on their own. So then, what's the point of the accomplishment, the what we want with the appointment of the king is a hecher neif. That's in a higher way. The madriges zu welche Eden kennen mit seinem Atzmum nicht zukommen. Those steps in godliness, the levels in godliness, madriges in the lakus, to which Jews Eden kennen mit seinem Atzmum nicht zukommen. On their own, they can't. They need Hashem to help. Weil die madriges seinen hecher von Seir Hasoge. Those levels, those steps are beyond their grasp. Is there melech? So then the king was that because of his greatness, as mentioned before, the king is so he understands also in those higher level in steps in godliness, which the ordinary people are not privy to. And so the king is mamshich mashpia Yisrael. So he extends them and it gives the flow to them, to the Jewish people. Those poiled by Eden. And this accomplishes us also by Yidden a higher level of fear and subjugation. A bittel, as such a kind of a subjugation, was his hecher from Zeir Havana Vasaga, which is beyond their understanding and grasp. So that's the second level. So by a Yid, just like in the king, especially and generally, by a Yid especially, we have the first level. The king may sometimes need to impact us to get the bittel and the yira of elikus on the simplest level to help us reach that level. But when Yidden are on a higher level, they already have the bittel on their own. The king, because of his greatness, is able to be mamshich to them even a higher level of bittel because of his grasp and advantage of his higher level. Gimel. So apizeh werden verantwortet the shilos and al. So based on this, the above questions are answered. Shmuel Hanovi had gewollt, Shmuel Hanovi wanted as their matzah for the Eden soll sein, that the situation of the Eden should be in an oifen in such a way as they sollen stehen mit habitl salakus bisal asma, that they should be subjugated to Hashem on their own, nicht unkommendiert zu Amelech, not needing to come on to the king to impact them with that subjugation to godliness. Und der Melech soll bei sei Poil sein der hechere Darge, and the king should be impacting them the higher level from Bittul and Yira, Bechlal, the subjugation, and generally the fear of Hashem, which Yira law, to come to a higher level of Yira, the upper level of Yira. But that was Shmuel Hanovi's desire for the Eden's level to be. Eden Hamaber Gibet. But what was their request? They didn't request the higher levels. It was Amelech l'Shoftim. They wanted a king to judge them just as all the nation. Amelech v'zol zei bavorenen. They wanted a king that should forewarn and protect from ish esreyu chaim beloy, so that one person does not swallow his friend alive. Was thus weiß that point as by Zeyod gefällt the Darge von Yerushalayim, that they were lacking that level, that step of fear of heaven. Was Eden davon haben mit seinem Asmen, that they didn't need to have on their own. Und der Pfarrer hat der Eberster gesagt, and that's why Hashem said, me, they refused, as felt by Yerushalayim. They are lacking fear of heaven. But we also understand as Afal became, yet even though Hashem is upset that they're not at that level, but still the Eibishter gave in to them. The Eibishter Tzinoch gegeben. Und geheißen Manazayin HaMelech, and he instructed that they should appoint a king. While then by Yid fell because when a Jew is lacking in his fear of Hashem, let it be for whatever reason, is afal pi azer darfa lane, even though he should on his own, under hashpoah from Melech, without the influence of the king, to come and to them bittel, to reach this bittel. Doch kemenit warten. So you cannot wait. You should really do it on your own, but we can't wait. Until he'll reach the level on his own, he should be a yid without having the yoke of heaven. Can't do that. And so the Eibishter gave in. So you need a king for that. You must immediately accept upon yourself a king. That should protect him in the inyonim in these matters. And then later on, as time goes on, then on his own, he will reach to the darga for bitlun gira, to the subjugation, to the step of subjugation and fear and awe of Hashem. Is oich to the darga from suga beis. Also get to the second category, dur chamelech, through a king, which is Yirei Lo, which is the higher level kinal, as mentioned earlier. Dalit. For Yeder Inyan Darkma Ristama Hero in Avodas Hashem. From every matter, we need to learn a lesson and instruction in our service to Hashem. Afal Piyab Isman Hagolus is Nitoke Melech, even though in the time of exile we don't have a king. Zogen aber Chazal, our sages of blessed memory, however, say, Man Malki Rabbonon, who are kings? The rabbis. Azoivias is not the mitzvah for Minu Melech. Just as there is a mitzvah to appoint a king, likewise a yid has on himself the command for Malki Rabbonon, the king, the rabbis, Asay L'chorav. This is the Rebbe's, make for you a teacher. The Rebbe went out very strongly with this instruction that every person needs to make for themselves a Rav. One of them is the Rav from Inyan Hanal. And over here we have the lesson from the above subject, above idea. There are some that think as benegated the indicated yonim. As far as the lower levels are concerned, they can understand alone and decide. And therefore, they don't have to ask a rabbi, but simple things. The Mishnah Zog, the Mishnah says, make yourself a Rav. Make yourself a Rav. Yet that every Jew needs to have a Rav. These people, however, they think, as their midver gemeint, that which is meant with it is the inyonim nailim, the great matters, the important, the elevated aspects. But when it comes to very simple matters, he believes himself. He does not need to come on to the influence of a Rav. That's something that he is able to accomplish on his own. But you see, it's already time has passed, and he's still standing in your low situation. You haven't done things by yourself. So and yet he thinks it's not proper to go with this zum Rav. He's going to wait, quoting the Pasuk, until a spirit from above will arouse and wake him up. Until they'll be aroused with the proper level of Yira. And then he will correct everything that he needs to correct. He'll do it on his own. He doesn't need a Rav. If that is the hero for Minu Melech Beruch Nis Itzar, that's the instruction of appointing a king on the spiritual level now. Hagam az olecha bayidin. Hagam az olecha bayidin. Bayid soim tosim olecha melech. Bayidin is in Yonei the main upulosi shel melech. What is the main aspect and the act of the king? Be'ikar shayach. It mainly applies as it relates to higher levels. But when the situation is also they refused me, there's lacking Yerushalayim Chas v'Sholom, or the Rachshashiv, or even you worry about that you might come to that level. Of them, then you need to immediately use the fear of the king to make sure that it doesn't happen. Hey, then we have another argument, the Zain and Faran, and there are also those that say, as they can it for Rav, they don't find for themselves a Rav. They need to know that this is the advice and the persuasion of the inclination. But Yisrael, the Jewish people quoting, is not an almon, is not a widower. It doesn't apply such a fact as Zwischen Eden's only design that amongst Yidden there should not be einer, at least one, was hat mer avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem from him, has more love of Hashem and more fear of Hashem than him. And then he could be his Rab. Or the fard of Zain Asay l'chorab. From the similar Asay, not just make but force. You must force and bend your own sense of self, and effort, I say, to work hard. He has to put an effort and search until he'll find a Rav, because on yourself you're not allowed to rely. You must have a Rav. If you put effort, you will find. If you will put in effort, work hard, and search with truth, you will find a Rav. And the Rav wird mit ihm einlernen, and the Rav will teach him, he'll become his melech, sort of. The Parshias was the melech for Kleinen Bahakil, those portions that the king would read by Hakil, Shema, B'hoyim, Shemoyo, B'chulu, the Shema, Shemoyo. Freer Shema was his Kabbalah Sil Machal Shemayim. First the Shema, which is accepting the heavenly yoke, and the Noch, B'hoyim, Shemoyo, Goyber, and then to listen to Hashem, V'asafta de Gonecho, to gather the grain of it, and Geben zu verstehen, Euchen HaSoge. You'll also understand that as the Vasafta de Ganecho, when are you going to be able to be successful in gathering the grain? Is told in them Shemaya Tishma, help hinges on when you listen. Nochmer with the Rav, that by Resign, and more than that, that the Rav will just arouse him, the Nidr Gedanke from Bittul Kabbalah, so the lower level of subjugation, accept the yoke. Better if him there noch mamshich sein, then later he will draw down on him the hecher madrege, the higher level yirei law. Kol hanalot hashaychus miyuchad, the above has a special connection to Iksa the Mashiach. Erev bias Mashiach tzidkenu, at the heels of Mashiach, before Mashiach is coming, was in Yoni is doch beide Sachen. He is two things. Rav is a Rav Yilma Torah Alman, Afil loves Moshe Rabbeinu. He'll teach Torah everybody, even the forefather Moshe Rabbeinu, Melech Malka Mashiach, and the king Mashiach. This is Mashiach Simchas Beis She'eva in Shnas Hakel in Tovshin Yud Gimel.